This is the story of Daphne, who longs to be alone with her very own BBC Micro. Alas for Daphne, Acorn have also made it rather attractive to small businessmen.
Hello, Dad.
Tragically, they've even made it irresistible to accountants.
Hello, Uncle Cyril.
Just get going.
And sad to say, it's become vital for everyone who needs up-to-the-minute information, thanks to its Presto and teletext adapters. Worst of all, it's absolutely bung-ho for busy administrators. And then there are those visitors who want to use its unearthly scientific potential. Poor Daphne. The BBC Micro Computer system is a world leader, and it's still growing.
Hey there, Retro Games fans, this is Andy C from Pieces of 8-Bit. Welcome to this week's video, and this week's video is all about Month With. I do look forward to doing these videos. It is really good to come back after spending a month with a piece of technology from way back when, or something that's reimagined, and telling you how that has been. So this month I have been using the BBC Bee, which is just sitting behind me here. It was sitting under my TV. I'm quite glad to have the space back, I'll be honest with you. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. Obviously not a console, but it is a piece of old tech. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit more about some of the other features of it rather than specifically just the gaming. But I will be talking to you a little bit about the history, how the BBC Bee came to be, and all the early BBC computers from the 80s through to the early 90s, and why they were important, especially here in the UK. I'll talk to you a little bit about the specifications, as I always do, tell you a little bit about that, and some of the games that I've been playing as well. And then what I'll do is I'll roll everything up into my final thoughts, because I did a sort of how was it like to live with it as a separate section. It went on a bit long last time, so I'll do that as a final thoughts, and I'll also be revealing what is in next month's Month With episode. So without any further ado, let's skip straight on to talking a little bit about the history and the reasons why the BBC Micro existed.
The average school child hasn't really changed much over the years. But school has. The computer has arrived. Under a government scheme, schools all over Britain are introducing microcomputers, and they're choosing one in particular, made by Acorn. As a result, the language it uses, called BBC Basic, has become the acknowledged computer language for schools. And now parents can catch up. For Acorn have produced a micro for the home that also uses BBC Basic. It's called the Electron. It's powerful, it's versatile, and it's only £199. So now your children can teach you all they know. The Acorn Electron can be found at larger W.H. Smith's or your local Acorn dealer. Just call 200 0200 for your nearest stockist.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the existence of this piece of equipment here. So the BBC essentially is, as you might imagine, for those of you who haven't watched any of these videos up to date, is from the BBC, as in the British Broadcasting Corporation. The ones that make Doctor Who and Blue Planet and all of those kind of things is the very same company. What the BBC wanted to do was they wanted to improve computer literacy across schools and education in the early 80s. Now, I was definitely a benefactor of that. I was at school in the 80s, and every school that I knew, certainly, I think it was about 80% of schools had a BBC Micro at some point during the 1980s, at least one. They were very expensive. And the BBC helped essentially a whole generation of people get into computing and programming. So it was really quite successful from that perspective. They partnered with a company called Acorn Computers, and you may be familiar with the Acorn Electron, and later computers like the Archimedes, the 3000, the 3010. They were also very much geared towards, especially those latter ones, very much more geared towards the educational sector. Very important in the UK. Obviously elsewhere in the world we've got other machines at the same time, such as the Commodore 64, and certainly in the US I understand that sort of Apple was more of the kind of de facto standard in the US for educational purposes. But here in the UK we saw this rather fetching looking BBC with its red function keys and black keys here. So yes, launched in the early 80s, so originally slated for a 1981 release. It came out in about 1982. Was originally called the Proton, the Acorn Proton, obviously later the BBC B. There was a Model A variant as well, which was a 16K version. This is the Model B, which was by far the most popular 32K version. And I saw this a lot, even when I was at high school in the 90s. There was still a lot of BBC B micros knocking around. Starting to get replaced in the mid 80s from about 1986 with the BBC Master Compact, which was really quite a cool machine. Looked a bit more like what you would associate with a modern PC, with a sort of CPU separate from the keyboard with the monitor on top. It was very durable. That was one of the attractions to schools as well. So it was very durable and it was very expandable. Came with all manner of peripherals, which I'll talk to you about in the next section. And it also, as I mentioned before, introduced us, a lot of us, including me, to the world of programming. It came with BBC Basic, which was very easy to use. And there were a number of other programming languages as well. I also learned Pascal on here, which was a very highly structured programming language. So yeah, it was great for that education sector. Lots and lots of documentation as well. So there's just one of the many user guides that I got when I acquired this machine. I've got a whole box full of different manuals as well. Now, cost-wise, it was very expensive. So at the time, it was supposed to be a sort of around the £325 mark. When it came out in 1982, it was nearer to £400, so £399, which in today's money is about £1,900, which, you know, you would be looking at a top-end gaming PC for that sort of money. So it was quite pricey. And just to give you some comparison, the Commodore 64, which came out about a year later, was around about the same price. And in fact, actually the BBC, although it had less memory, on paper did come across as being a little bit more powerful, actually, as it happens. But obviously the success of the Commodore 64 was largely down to its home market. So in the US, Commodore 64 was very popular, and that did certainly reflect over here to some degree. But over here, of course, for those of you who are my age, you will remember the ZX Spectrum, and the ZX Spectrum really was the computer that captured everybody's imagination. It was about half the price. The 48K version was £175, so that's a lot cheaper. It's less than half the price of the BBC, and so from a home perspective, a lot less people really kind of had it in their homes. I did know one person. I knew one person who had a BBC in their home in the mid 80s, and I was absolutely blown away by it. You know, it came with a floppy drive, whereas the Spectrum was typically using a tape drive. You could use a tape drive on the BBC. You could also use something, you could have a hard drive on it, typically called a Winchester. That was quite a rare thing to find, but typically people were using floppy drives, which were much quicker than tapes, and a little bit more reliable as well. It also came with network connectivity, but again, I'll talk to you a little bit about that in the specification section. But yeah, that was sort of broadly it in terms of the history. There is loads of information about the BBC out there on the internet, and how it sort of came to be. But ultimately, I think what the BBC achieved with Acorn back then in the 1980s was amazing. You know, that they really did launch a whole cohort of programmers and computer scientists way back then in the 80s, and they were an incredibly flexible machine. So they were out in industry as well, and used a lot in different sectors, specifically science and research as well. So fantastic. And of course, there is just one other thing that you may be familiar with. For those of you in the UK, we used to have a TV-based service called the information service called Teletext, or CFAX, as it was the BBC version, and that was largely powered by some modified BBC microcomputers. And in fact, actually, this device here that I've got allowed you to pick up Teletext on your BBC, so you could actually have a look at that. And I remember at school we had the teletext adapter, and it was great. It felt really futuristic that on my computer we were looking at teletext services. It was really good. That is now completely surplus to requirements, although actually surprisingly well sought after. A lot of people look for those teletext adapters and they put other things in them, or have a go at doing something themselves with Raspberry Pi. So there we go. That's a little bit about the history. So let's move on to the next section. Let's talk a little bit about some of the specifications of this BBC. Okay, so for such an expensive machine, well, how powerful actually was it? Well, I'll give you the sort of scores on the doors. Essentially, as I mentioned before, £399 for the Series B, the more popular one, which is the one I've got here. So let's talk about the specs of that. The Series A was a 16K model, and the Series B was a 32K model, and that essentially was the sort of main difference between the two. There wasn't really much else in it. They both had a 2 megahertz 6502 processor in them, 640 by 256 display, which was much higher resolution than the Commodore 64 of the time. Also a quicker processor, I might add as well. Came with something called Econet, which is something I had at school, which allowed you to connect up your BBC into a local area network and communicate. We could actually send messages to each other, which we thought was incredibly futuristic. But yeah, that was very powerful. And in fact, actually, if you go down to places like the British Computer Museum down in Bletchley, they actually have Econet parties and events and things, and you bring your BBC and hook up to their network down there if you want to go do that sort of thing. And it came with a number of different peripherals. In terms of storage, as I mentioned before, you could have cassette. You could also have 3.5-inch floppy as well on there. Now I'm going to show you some of the additional specifications now. One of the best sort of things about the BBC was just how, I mentioned its durability, but it also just how serviceable it is. So I've unscrewed the lid off this already. We take this apart. It's very, very easy to get into. There were a number of different versions of the boards. This is an issue 4 board. I've also got another one out in the garage, which is an issue 7 board. But they were very, very easy to service. So you can see it's quite componentized. I've actually had these power supplies redone, recapped from new. Didn't actually cost me that much at all. You just take the unit out and send it off. It's very easy to fit back in. It's very easy to fit back on the motherboard there. There's little sort of guides as to where everything needs to go. Very, very straightforward indeed. Under the keyboard here, I'll just try and lift this back 1 second. So over here on the right hand side is basically the additional ROMs that you can include now. So that was a fantastic feature of the BBC, which is that you could include software on these ROM chips here. You could also buy an expansion board. So the other BBC that I've got has got an expansion board on it, which sits on top here, and you can put a whole bunch of other ROMs in there as well, and it allows you to have things. So this one here, you can see I probably can't quite make it out there. It's because the basic editor, Acorn Soft. So that will basically mean that the software for that is on that chip, and it loads very, very quickly. So a lot of the programs we used in schools were already on these ROM chips, and it's very expandable, very easy to take the lid off and add your own ROMs in there as well. You could also program your own ROMs if you had an EEPROM programmer. You could pop the software onto those and pop them on here as well. And the interface actually, for its time, the actual way that you access the software was incredibly straightforward actually. Yeah, once you kind of got the hang of how it worked, it was actually very, very easy to use for a text-based operating system. So I'm just going to turn this over. I'm just going to hold the key here. So on the bottom here, you can also see a number of expansion ports here. And so this is where you've got things like your parallel ports, your serial ports, various peripheral ports on the bottom here. And this little purple thing here, this is my MMFS card reader. Essentially on the top here, I've got a ROM, which is called MMFS Turbo 1.55. So you pop that ROM in, and then down here, that will then support this little device here. Basically what's in there is a modern SD card, and it's a reader, and there's a whole bunch of BBC software on that card which you can access. You can also use things like a GoTech. That's another way of also doing it, but this is sort of the way that seemed to be the standard. It comes with a nice little interface that you can scroll through, and there's loads and loads and loads and loads of software on there. Now, of course, I mentioned about a lot of that software, about the fact this was educational. So a lot of that software is educational software, educational games. If you saw my video the other week, you'd have seen me playing Scoop, which is an educational game. A lot of things like that, maths games and puzzle games and things like that, which are meant to be educational. So there is a lot of those things there as well. Let me just pop the lid back on that and move that out of the way. If I put it the right way around. Actually, on the lid itself, it came with, I probably just saw that falling out actually, it came with a little cardboard strip that would fit under here as well. And that cardboard strip meant that different bits of software might come with that cardboard strip and allow you to use different keys and all sorts of things like that as well. Now, all of that expandability and durability meant that meant that it's also very easy to service. So I did a video a little while back when I acquired these units and just took all of the motherboard and everything else out, gave them a really good clean. The feet on the bottom had perished. I mean, they're over 40 years old, so I replaced all of those. You can buy screw kits for it. It's very, very easy to maintain. And actually, if you're interested in sort of the science of computing, you just kind of want to get into it, BBC is a great case study. You can go and have a look at it and have a bit of a tinker with it, and it's very easy to access and service as well. So that is a little bit about the sort of hardware and the specifications. So let's talk a little bit now about some of the games that I have been playing. Okay, so I'll say it again. I say it every single time I do a month with. Obviously, from a gaming perspective, it's the games that make the console, is what I say. Obviously, this isn't a console; it's a computer, a school computer. It's not really even a home computer, is it? And in this particular instance, it's not the games that make it. So this is the exception, probably, that proves the rule. The BBC, as I mentioned before, was all about computer literacy. So it was all about the utilities and facilities and that expandability that really made this such a compelling device to have in a school. That said, I have been playing some games this month. It has been fraught with a few issues. So one of the things that I would definitely recommend doing is going and having a look at the more detailed view of the 3 games that I played before, which was Repton, Chucky Egg and Scoop. I'm just going to talk about those 3 very, very briefly again, but obviously if you want a bit more detail on those games, go and have a look at them. There's a couple of other games that I've also been playing, which I will talk to you about as well. So first of all, Repton, game from 1985, really, really cool game on the BBC, and sort of a little puzzler where you walk around and you've got to kind of work out, make sure the rocks don't drop on your head, make sure you don't get caught out by the little geckos that are moving around. Played a few levels of that. Quite an addictive little game, actually. Very, very straightforward, and quite inventive. And obviously there were some more versions of that. So I had a good play with Repton. Got quite addicted to that. Played that quite a lot until the computer stopped working, and I'll tell you more about that in a little while. Then obviously I played Chucky Egg. Now, if you're playing on a BBC, if you're playing on the BBC emulator, Chucky Egg absolutely is a must. It's one of the best games on the BBC. The lad that wrote it was 17 years old when he wrote the game. It's a fantastic little platformer. It saw some ports elsewhere on other devices. Again, if you go back and watch my video, I'll tell you a lot more about the game. Came out in 1983. Absolutely fantastic little platformer. Very, very simple concept. You move around the map. You've got to get the eggs. The birds will try and catch you, and you've got to try and avoid getting caught by the big bird in the cage at the top. Very simple. Ladders up and down. Requires a certain level of preciseness to get on the ladders, or certainly get off at certain levels, but a great fun game to play as well. I mentioned Scoop. So talk very briefly about Scoop. Scoop was an educational game. It was a text-based adventure with a few little basic graphics on it. and essentially you played the part of a journalist. You had to get the scoop before the day ended. Lots of little clues, moving around. It was great fun to play as a kid in school. It was certainly a lot better than sitting in lesson. So we just felt like this was like some kind of life hack, really, that we got out there to play this game. I really liked Scoop, and that's why I picked it as a game. It's a game that I remember playing a lot on the BBC as well. A couple of other games that I've been playing. So Night Law, had another look back at Night Law. So Night Law, in fact, was one of the very first videos that I did on this channel. It's a game that I love. I actually said at the time about whether I would go back and play it again, and I think I sort of drew the idea of leaving it in the past, but I think I've perhaps softened to that a little bit. It's a game that I mostly remember playing on the Spectrum back in the day, but Night Law is a classic sort of cutaway game. What do they call them? Isometric, that's the word I was looking for. Isometric game. You spend half your time as a werewolf, half your time as a person, and you can do different things depending on what you are, and you change as the full moon comes out. And it's a very inventive little game, quite a sweet little sort of dungeon crawler. Really do enjoy that game. Actually, it is good fun to play, and just I think need to be patient and persistent with it, which maybe I wasn't a year ago when I played it last time. And probably the last one I'm going to mention, I did play a few other things as well. Played a bit of Frogger, which was some weird version of Frogger, which really wasn't very good. And then of course the other big one is Elite. Played Elite, which is a fantastic game. I'm a huge No Man's Sky fan in more recent years, and Elite is the game that really started that sort of open space trading genre. If I'm honest, I struggled to get to grips with it a little bit. I couldn't work out the controls. So I had to go and find the manual online to work out what I needed to do to play Elite. But had a bit of a play with it. It is really good fun. Yeah, it's there's so many games. I mean, there is obviously an Elite game out now, Elite Dangerous. You can go play, so a much more modern variant of that. I mentioned No Man's Sky. You got Starfield. There's loads of games like that now. I think Eve, is it Eve Online? I think it's quite a similar game as well. Loads of games, all can trace their roots back to Elite. And at the time, this idea of this kind of massive open universe where you could kind of go anywhere and trade and fly about was just fantastic. So did enjoy playing a bit of Elite, even though it took me a little while to even work out how to get the ship launched. So there we go. Those are all the games that I played. And just before I kind of wrap up on that, there's a couple of peripherals that I wanted to talk to you about in terms of the gaming side. So there was a joystick you could get. So this is one of the BBC joysticks. I've got a couple of these. Quite a nice little sort of joystick with a few extra buttons on. Somehow reminds me of the Atari one. I think it's all these buttons at the bottom here, maybe. Not a bad joystick to use, to be honest. The thing with the BBC is not always the game. Sorry, start again. The games didn't always necessarily support joystick, so you might see it pop up with Kempston occasionally. But a lot of the games you just played with the keys. That was quite normal on the BBC, with cursor keys or another key setup. So quite often you would find you'd go into a game and get the joystick hooked up, and the joystick wouldn't actually work. I also have this, which is a bit stick. And the bit stick, again, the support for this, I don't even know if I've got a working ROM for this. I couldn't find it. But you need that for this, so it's essentially like the modern day equivalent of having a driver. But the bit stick actually is one of the first truly analog input devices. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, they're quite rare actually. I haven't had a really good go with this, but this is another peripheral that I just kind of wanted to show you there as well. So there we go. So that is those are the games that I've been playing. Yeah, it's been good fun. It has been good fun playing on those games and reminiscing and going back. Yeah, to be honest with you, a lot of the games, especially things like Chucky Egg and Elite and stuff like that, you could get those on other platforms. So there's no reason to go and necessarily play those on the BBC, especially Night Law as well on the Spectrum. That was very, very similar. And so, again, there's not a huge draw to needing to go and get a BBC to play some of those classic 80s games. But yeah, fun nonetheless. So let's go and have final thoughts, and I'll tell you a little bit about what it's been like to live with the BBC Bee for the last 4 weeks or so, and I will also reveal what is coming up next month. Okay, so how do you get back into the world of BBC, and what was it like to live with it? So these are my kind of final thoughts, really. So first and foremost, living with the BBC Micro hasn't been quite as much fun as it has been with other consoles. And in fact, even the Spectrum, the reimagined ZX Spectrum, which I loved, I would absolutely go and play that again, and I really enjoyed that. It looked and felt like a ZX Spectrum, but it was a newer machine. I think that's part of it as well. I think if I played on an old ZX Spectrum and had to do the tape loading and had all the unreliability issues, I think probably my view of that will be the same as my view of having the BBC. I've had a couple of problems with it. First of all, reliability. So it works for a little while, then it sort of freezes, the keys stop working, you reset it, it just beeps at you, doesn't really do anything. Now that could be any number of things. It could just be because it's 45 years old. It could be because it is 43, 42, doesn't matter. It's old. Or it could just be that I've, the MMFS chip that I put in doesn't work properly. It could be that. It could be the card that I've put in doesn't work properly, though I did take that out and it still seemed to do the same thing. So it just seems to be a bit of an age-related concern. What I might do is swap out the expansion board on the Model 7 version that I've got out in the garage and try it on there a little bit as well. But it is a bit it was frustrating because I wanted to play and it would only work for so long, or I might not be able to get it to work at all. So that was an issue. I suspect an age-related issue, which was a bit of a shame. But also because the games themselves, frankly, there are better versions elsewhere. So, on the Commodore 64, one of my favourite games, Impossible Mission, you can play that as on the Master System. Great version on there. On the Commodore 64, great version on there. There is a version on the BBC. It's okay. It's the Night Law game. Again, you can play that on the ZX Spectrum. The version of it is practically identical. So that meant that really a lot of the education software, you kind of don't want to be going and doing your times tables as a kind of, well, unless that floats your boat, of course. This is just not really that interesting to me. So a lot of the educational software on there wasn't that interesting. Lots of sort of rip-off versions of games as well on there. So there's loads of sort of versions of games that sounded like something else but were something different. So you have like versions of Frogger and stuff that weren't called Frogger. Lots of things like that that just aren't quite as good. So it was very much a mixed bag. I enjoyed going back and playing things like Scoop because it sort of took me back to those days in my classroom and kind of going out and playing. But really, I think probably when the BBC goes back away, I will only get it out every now and again to sort of showcase, or if there's a piece of software that I suddenly remember or want to have a look at, or if I want to go back and do a bit of sort of early 80s programming, and that's very possible that I might want to go do that. But generally speaking, I think probably it'll get left for a while more as a showpiece than something that I use all the time. But all of that said, if you do want to get back into the world of BBC computing, there are lots of ways of doing it. I mention this every time. There's always an emulator for these things. You can go find the B2 emulator. It's very, very good, very easy to use. The software is quite easy to find online. There's a lot of stuff on abandonware, so you can go and download some older software that's out of copyright, or more importantly, I've talked about this before, not necessarily as a copyright, but basically, it's just sort of orphaned software. You can go and find a lot of the software. That's where I found Scoop. Obviously, if you have the software yourself, I've got loads of floppy disks with loads of BBC software on, so I've sort of tried to keep to software that I already own before putting it into the emulator. Yeah, there is loads of software out there, and the B2 emulator is really, really cool. It's got all the sounds and everything else that you'd expect, and even when you load the programs, you can kind of hear it puts like a floppy disk sound in the background, which is kind of cool. So B2 emulator is one way to go. I wouldn't necessarily suggest going for anything on the Raspberry Pi. I would just stick to your home computer. There's a version for the Mac, and I think that for the PC as well. So go and have a look at the B2 emulator if you want to go and have a look, and obviously you can get access to the basic programming and all those kind of cool things as well. You can of course go and find yourself a BBC computer. They are quite expensive still, actually. You'll still find that you'll be paying sort of £150–200 for a really good one. The BBC Master Compact, which is backwardly compatible, will fetch a little bit more. You can get yourself an authentic cub monitor. So I do have a cub monitor. It's a fantastic looking piece of retro equipment. They're quite expensive now as well, so if you manage to lay your hands on a cub monitor, hold on to it. Main issue I have is I don't have anywhere to store it, which is a real problem. But there are some great forums out there. There's a really good community. One in particular is an Acorn and BBC enthusiasts community on Facebook, which I'm signed up to. They are fantastic. You can buy and sell equipment on those sorts of forums as well, and people will give you lots of help on top, and you can get spares and repairs and things like that. So I actually found the chap that did my power supply repairs on there. He did a great job. I actually had 3 power supplies, and basically I sold him one of them, and that offset the cost of the repair of the other 2, which was really, really cool. So, and there are other alternatives to power supplies as well. If you're looking for them, there is a USB-C retrofit that you can do, which I did have initially, but I think getting the proper ones is the way to go. So you can go find yourself equipment. You'll find it on eBay. You can also go and have a look at the Archimedes, the sort of newer versions as well. They are really quite pricey now, so if you can lay your hands on one of those at a good price, definitely recommend doing that. And you get a nice GUI on those. There's very much sort of more 90s technology, and there were some great bits of software on those back in the day. And there were a few games as well that I quite enjoyed. I would like to see if I can lay my hands on one on there as well. And then one kind of wild card option is to go and have a look at the BBC Computer Museum. British Computer Museum if you happen to be in the UK. It's down in Bletchley. You can go to Bletchley Park, which is next door with all the code breakers. You can have a look at my video to go to the British Computer Museum as part of one of my road trips. I think it's road trip number 3 to Milton Keynes. They actually have a BBC micro classroom that you can go to, and they have various BBC events down there as well. So if you want to just go and have a play, you don't necessarily want to invest, you just want to go and have a bit of a hands-on play. If you're in the UK, get yourself down to the National Computer Museum down in Bletchley in Milton Keynes, and you can have a good play on that. So, there we go. So would I recommend going and getting a BBC for gaming? No, I wouldn't. I'm sorry, I absolutely wouldn't. But I would recommend it if you do want to go and do, if you want to get back into sort of BBC basic programming, and you want to really remind yourself what it was like for those school days in the 1980s. It's going to be very niche, small kind of subset of people, I'm sure, that feel that way. Then yeah, go check it out. But I would check out the B2 emulator first, remembering that some of this kit is very old. BBCs and other computers like this obviously are more quite complex machines for their day, and I think they are starting to suffer a little bit with their age. That said, I had a couple of these, and the one I have out in the garage is robust. They are robust and durable, but you've got to bear in mind they are also still delicate electronics, and it is still over 40 years since they came out. So there we go. I think that's probably all I wanted to say on the BBC. So now and next, so as always, I say this every week now, we've got a racing challenge coming up. It's going to be Rage Racer, which was to celebrate the anniversary of these challenges starting. It's the only one I didn't do. So I'm going to be having a go with that with Oliver very soon. But the moment you have been waiting for, what is the console for next month? And it is a console. It is one of my absolute favourite consoles, and a console that didn't really sell all that well back in the day. But that console is the Nintendo GameCube. So I'm going to put the Nintendo GameCube. It will actually be going in my living room under the television. And I have got a load of games lined up that I want to play, some which I'll be able to show you and some which I won't. So Donkey Kong Bongos is going to be quite tricky to show you because I won't be able to run that on the emulator. I have the emulator set up. I've got my games downloaded that I'm going to be playing on this in the living room, ready to kind of show you a little bit about those as well. So I am super excited to be getting back into the Nintendo GameCube. I absolutely love this little device. It is one of my favourite consoles from that era. So yes, that's coming up. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to say, just before I sign off, thank you for everybody who did a bit of a shout out and wished me luck in my walk. So I am now the other side of this. I did it was 126 kilometers, 80 plus miles that I did around the what's called the Tarka Trail down in Devon. It was incredibly hard, probably the hardest thing I've physically ever had to do in my life. Did it over 5 days. We raised over £1,000 for I raised over, my friend raised some money for the NSBCC, and I raised some money for a local Cornwall prostate cancer association, a charity that's very close to my heart, and raised a whole bunch of money for our charities. And yeah, my feet look like an absolute horror show, but generally I feel pretty good. I enjoyed the mental downtime. So yeah, thank you to everybody, whether you sponsored or you did a shout out or wish me luck, any of those things. Thank you so much for your support if you're watching this. So yeah, that's the end of that now. So I'm gonna try and think about what might be quite a good next adventure. I think if you still want to donate, I'll pop the Just Giving link into the description. So that just leaves me to say, if you enjoy these videos, please do hit that like and subscribe button. I'm so close to 500 now. It's getting inching closer every day, which is just a massive milestone for me, having done this channel for just over a month. That would be great. 500 after just a year, sorry, after doing this for just over a year. Getting to that 500 is going to be really, really big. So if you're watching this and you haven't hit that like and subscribe button yet, certainly the subscribe button, please do. It means so much to me, genuinely. So thank you very much for that. So that's it then for this week. So we'll be talking a little bit about GameCube coming up soon, but until then, please do take care of yourselves. I'll see you around. Bye for now.